Hello, folks. Welcome to Unit 7 of Warfare in the Ancient World, in which we're going to look at the theater of war, specifically the Athenian theater of war, not theater of war like where you're fighting, but actual legit theater. So you are going to watch one play and read one play that deals with warfare. What it does to people, why we do it, what the consequences are, and to understand what's going on in these plays, we need to talk a little bit about the historical context. So first, we're going to go with the political history context, which means getting a little bit into the war between Athens and Sparta. So in 479 BCE, the land army of the Persians was beaten back and returned to the Persian Empire. The sea battle, of course, at Salamis in 480 got rid of the fleet. So at that point, Xerxes was back home, going back to his business of being the king of Persia. More about that if you read the Persians play. So what happened to the leaders of the resistance? Well, exactly. It's an interesting story. Are you interested?
No.
You're not interested. Well, hopefully you guys are more interested than this toddler. Themistocles, you will remember, is the leader of the Athenian fleet at Salamis, and the fellow who managed to trick Xerxes into attacking before all of his allies could up stakes and go home. This pattern of shenanigans didn't disappear with the end of the Persian Wars. Themistocles continued to run a series of schemes that eventually got him kicked out of Athens. What you're looking at here are the ostraca. So an ostracon, singular, is a broken piece of pottery that you can use as scratch paper. And this is how Athenians did votes. You'd scratch a person's name onto a piece of broken pottery. They'd collect all of the names, and then that's one way of doing a vote. They did this for a procedure called ostracism. So an ostracism was when Athenians got together and essentially voted whichever Athenian they didn't like the most off of the island. A little bit like Survivor, only more so. The idea behind it was that in order to keep the democracy from being taken over by oligarchs and tyrants, they would occasionally vote on who they thought was most likely to make himself a tyrant. And Themistocles' number came up. So here are the actual votes. We dug these up in the Athenian Agora, so we still have like the ballots, and that's what these are. If you look, this says the name begins here. There's a theta. Themistocles Neocleos, Themistocles, son of Neocles. Here's his bust. Of course, it's missing its paint. Yeah, so Themistocles got kicked out of Athens. But Athens wasn't the only place that had to get rid of its war leaders. After Leonidas died, Pausanias was left to lead the rest of the Spartan army. They'd only lost 300 at Thermopylae. They still had plenty of folks. And then folks from other city-states were there too. Pausanias led the Allied command. And as the rumor goes, when the Persians in that final land battle at Plataea finally ran away, leaving their tents and their stuff behind, Pausanias walks through the abandoned Persian tents and he's like, they have comfy beds, and oh my gosh, their cloth is so soft, and the food, oh my gosh, this food is so much better. Because he was from Sparta, where they deliberately outlawed Spartans having nice beds and clothes and things. Keep in mind that's part of Sparta's strategy for making their leaders extra tough. But what ends up happening is Spartans, like Pausanias, see that you don't have to have uncomfortable clothes for the rest of your life, and sometimes food can taste good. And seeing that, he starts to get into his head that, maybe Sparta could stand with some improved creature comforts. Let's see how Sparta dealt with that. So let's see how this turned out for our two leaders of the Third Persian invasion's resistance on the Greek side. Themistocles gets kicked out of Athens, and he makes his way to the Persian Empire, where he gets a job with Xerxes as satrap of Magnesia. Go him! So the dude who was leading a major point of the Greek resistance in the Third Persian invasion himself medizes, because Xerxes is a pretty good dude to work for, actually. So that works out great for him. Alas for Pausanias, the story isn't as great. We didn't talk about Pausanias as much. He is the Spartan leader after Leonidas dies. So Leonidas dies. Pausanias is leading the Spartan army in land battles against the Persians. And in 479, he finally defeats the Persians at the Battle of Plataea near Athens. But according to legend, as he's going through the abandoned Persian tents after the battle, the food's still on the tables, there's all this nice stuff, and he's from Sparta, right? Sparta has all kinds of laws and customs that restrict the amount of nice, comfortable things Spartans have access to. So it's the first time he's ever seen like comfy clothes and, I don't know, underwear that don't itch and food that tastes great. Spartan food was infamous for being really disgusting. Apparently Spartans made a point of having their food not be pleasant to eat because they thought it would make you tougher. What it actually makes you do is really value good food when you taste it. So Pausanias has some Persian food, he wears some Persian clothes, he's like, I don't feel any less tough than I did a minute ago, but I feel a lot less itchy. Oh my gosh, good food is great! Why have we not been using this stuff? And the rumor starts back in Sparta, and I don't know if it's true or not, but that Pausanias has been colluding with the Persians, that he got a little bit too used to the nice Persian stuff he saw after the battle, and that he might have been communicating with and conspiring with Persia for nefarious purposes. So the Spartans turn on him in an angry mob. Pausanias runs for cover to the Temple of Athena in the Bronze House. The rules of temples are, if somebody runs there for sanctuary, you cannot murder them. You also can't rape them. You can't beat them up. You just have to let them there. Sanctuary rules work the same as they do in dramatic movies about people running into churches for sanctuary. In fact, that's where the custom comes from. But nowhere is it written that when someone claims sanctuary, you have to feed them, which is what happens to Pausanias. The Spartans refuse to send any food into the temple, and they just let Pausanias slowly starve to death in the temple. And according to legend, his ghost still haunts it. What we're looking at now is what's left of this. So these are just the foundation stones. And I wasn't there after dark, so I can neither confirm nor deny that Pausanias' ghost still haunts these stones, but it felt creepy. I'm gonna say yes. Alright, moving on. So much for Themistocles and Pausanias. But as for everyone else left in the Greek mainland, there was still this worry. Is Persia going to come back for another invasion? And what are we going to do to make sure that it's not quite such a last-minute hack job? Although they won, so I don't know why I'm finding fault with them here. But there's a political problem in this. Athens and Sparta barely got along well enough to defend against the Persians in invasion number 3, and they certainly didn't want to work with each other long term. Meanwhile, every single state in the Greek-speaking world is a city-state, and they've been at war with each other one way or another for centuries by the time we get to this point. This is why hoplites were invented, right? Not to fight Persians, but to fight other Greek city-states with citizen armies. A lot of city-states don't want to join with some of their ancestral enemies, but the majority of them broke down into groups who either didn't like Athens or didn't like Sparta. There's kind of a Team Athens and a Team Sparta thing going on here. Enter the Delian League and the Peloponnesian League. And I'll start with the Delian League here. Now, the Delian League is confusingly run by Athens. That's because its headquarters are on the island of Delos, which is sacred to the goddess Artemis and the god Apollo, mostly Apollo. And remember temple rules again. You can't kill people there. You also can't steal anything from a temple. So if, like the Delian League, you're creating a financial safety net, and this was the concept that Athens and her allies went with, is that we all pay into a treasury, and then we use that treasury as a nest egg to help us defend and prepare and then defray expenses when the Persians come. Athens goes on to say, look, we're all about freedom, right? So we won't make you choose a different kind of government. We won't interfere in your internal politics. All we want is for you to pay your taxes and cooperate with us against Persians. So no Medizing, pay your taxes. As time went on, though, Athens decided to alter the deal. Alter the Delian League. Oh, that's bad. Yeah. So they first moved the treasury from the island of Delos to another temple, which to them was fine. It was like, Delos is a temple, we're putting it in a temple. The temple just happened to be the newly built Parthenon in the center of downtown Athens, on the Athenian Acropolis, the hill in the middle of Athens. Now, if this sounds to you like the Athenians were taking funds meant to defend against the Persians and putting them in their own pocket, you're right, that's exactly what they did. They embezzled a lot of these funds, although the Athenians would counter that, look, the Persians destroyed our entire city. We need to rebuild. We need this money to rebuild. We're not going to defend against the Persians if we don't have walls. You don't want us to not have walls, do you? This is totally a legitimate defense expense. Not only that, but we are most at risk if Persia comes back, because our city-state pissed off Persia the worst in this last encounter. So we deserve nice things. And if we're rebuilding stuff, why don't we build the nicest stuff we can? And eventually they start using this funding to hire the best artists in the Greek-speaking world to make the most beautiful temples possible. And they're still there. If you go to Athens today, you'll see the Parthenon just hanging there on the skyline, looking lovely. But it's built with embezzled funds, so. But then there's one last move, and this is the move that makes other people, and also people in the Delian League, feel a little wary of Athens. Because Athens starts going to the allies and saying, guys, you know what? We think that it's just too burdensome to make you have your own fleet, so we're just going to go ahead and dismantle your fleet, and then we'll be your security from now on. This is a new benefit of the Delian League. You'll really like it. You don't have to worry about your own ships anymore. Athens will be your ships and your navy, and we'll take care of you guys. And if the Delian League members were like, we'd kind of like to keep our own navy, actually, Athens. Athens eventually started going to war against them and taking over the island by force of arms and forcing them to then toe the line. But there's another league, the Peloponnesian League, named after the landmass here, the Peloponnese. This is the southern area of Greece below the Isthmus of Corinth. Corinth is this choke point between northern and southern mainland Greece. Now, the Peloponnesians didn't make you pay money. You just joined by saying you're going to join and vowing to work with Sparta. You did, however, have to have an oligarchy. Sparta was an oligarchy. They were ruled by just a few people in the Council of Elders and a couple of kings. It's complicated. So they wanted to work with other governments that were like them. Now, Sparta, as a landlocked state, also had invested very heavily in land military. Not so much in ships, though. Corinth was one area they had that did have a lot of ships. But if you look at the green areas on the map, which are the Peloponnesian League areas, it's a lot of landlocked bits. You do have, say, Thessaly and Macedonia and Euboea in the Athenian end, and that's used by Athens as their breadbasket during this upcoming conflict. But the Peloponnese is very much about big phalanxes, overland warfare, and Corinth is doing a lot of the ship funding and supporting. And Corinth is the squeaky wheel at the beginning of this conflict. They go to Sparta and they're like, dudes, how much more provocation do you need? Athens is fortifying itself, it's taking away other people's navies, it's forcing people to pay money, and it's taking the funds and spending it all on nice fancy walls. The more they build these walls, the harder it is to attack Athens. Oh my gosh, can you not see that this is Athens trying to become the new Persia? So in other words, the worry was, and I think this is pretty justified, that the idea Athens got from watching the Persian invasion was that, hey, we could be in charge of the Greek mainland. And then they proceed for the next century to give it their best shot. But because of this two-league structure, the Peloponnesian League eventually steps in and says, look, no, Athens, cut it out, quit it. We are going to attack you, which is what they do. And over the next years, Athens does well at first, but eventually by 404, they lose to Sparta. Sparta takes over Athens. Athens' walls are knocked back down, and there we are. So this is the island of Delos. As I mentioned, it's sacred to Apollo. The entire island is a shrine, and that's where the first treasury was. So in the early halcyon days of the Delian League, before Athens started using it as a springboard for power grabbing, here's where the money was. And it's nice and centrally located if you have a lot of ships. And Athens' allies tended to. Athens billed itself as the alliance of choice for maritime nations, whereas Sparta was the alliance of choice for land-based. And then I guess, this is a quote from Thucydides just summarizing all of this. So you'll hear the Spartans called the Lacedaemonians sometimes. Lacedaemonia is the name of the land on which the city of Sparta is placed. So it's a little bit like the relationship between Baltimore and Maryland, right? Baltimore, the city, is in Maryland, the state, and Maryland, the state, is in the United States. So if you think of like the Peloponnesian League, and the Peloponnese is the country, that's the US. The Maryland part is this region of land, broad swathe around the city of Sparta, and then like Baltimore is Sparta. So that's the relationship here. So sometimes you'll see them called Lacedaemonians, sometimes they'll call them Spartans. It's interchangeable. These are the same people. Athens is nice, and it's just Athens, but the name of the league is Delian League. So the Spartans are like, look, we just want you to have an oligarchy, we want you to cooperate with us, but you don't have to pay taxes. The Athenians are like, hey, you can have whatever government you want, but you have to pay us taxes, unless you're Chios and Lesbos. And then they also took away their ships. This is in the middle. Had by decrees deprived hers of her ships, is that thing. So if you join the Delian League, you don't have any more warships, and you give all of your money to the Delian League treasury, which eventually is in the city of Athens. If this sounds like it would make you mad, it's a bit of a bait and switch. Well, that was true of Athens' allies. They didn't like this very much either. One of the problems Athens has to deal with in this century is the constant threat of revolt from her allies and also their protests. Because remember, Athens started this by saying, we saved Greece from the Persians at Marathon and also Salamis. We are responsible for Greece being free, and we want Greece to keep being free. So the way to ensure your freedom is to do what Athens tells you to. to which some of their allies and other neutral states were like, Athens, are we still free if we have to do whatever you tell us to? And Athens is like, oh, totally, totally, because we're letting you be free. This tension eventually leads to a war between Athens and Sparta and their various allies. Entangling alliance pulls people into it, and by the time you get to 431 BCE, the war has begun in earnest. There's some initial skirmishes leading into that. The movie I'm having you watch was put on in the very late years of the Peloponnesian War, right towards the end when Athens was already losing. And Athens was looking back at this war with Sparta and saying, oh my God, what were we thinking? Like, what have we done? We've alienated all of our allies. We were so eager for domination and war and looting that we've gotten ourselves into this situation where we might be taken over by Sparta, which is what happens. Sparta wins the Peloponnesian War in 404 BCE, and they occupy the city of Athens. They almost destroy it and enslave everybody in it, but they decide not to because they're like, yeah, we're not like you, Athens. We're classy. And that explains some of the wistful tone of the Iphigenia. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering how we know how much money was in the Delian League and where it was going, these are the receipts. These large marble stelae, these large marble slabs, are all carved in with different islands and city-states and how much money they were giving to Athens that year. Because Athens was a democracy, they needed public records, and lucky for us, their public records are carved onto pieces of stone. So we have the receipts. We can prove embezzlement. Athens totally embezzled this money and used it to recruit all of the best artists in the Greek-speaking world to work on their fancy Parthenon, and etc. Parthenon's very pretty. I mean, good job. Funding the arts is nice. Embezzlement, not so much. All right, welcome to one of several building projects coming out of the Delian League treasury. That is the Long Walls. Now, Themistocles originally proposed this idea. Athens yeeted Themistocles, but they kept the wall idea. So the first walls are built within years of the Third Persian invasion, and they cause Sparta some concern because they're made linking downtown Athens to the harbor by what are called the Long Walls. North Long Wall, South Long Wall around here. We'll look at this on the cityscape of Athens in a minute. This is the settled urban downtown of Athens. The marketplace, the Acropolis is all in this little area. Athenians themselves live all around here in the countryside with their olive trees as they're growing them back after the Persians have cut them down. The harbor, the Piraeus, we're going to look at a little bit more closely. This is both the civilian and the military harbor, and this is an international port. Goods are coming in from all over the Eastern Mediterranean, and as Athens' power in the Delian League grows, this is a trading hub for all of Athens' imperial allies. So the tribute is coming in through this harbor, as are trade goods from all over the world. So Athens is getting really rich off this harbor. By building the walls between, they create a situation in which you can take goods from the harbor to the city without ever leaving the walls. These walls are a couple miles long, not so long that you can't see them on a clear day, but long enough that ordinarily it would make more sense to just fortify the harbor, fortify the city. Especially if you're defending against a Persian invasion. And the Persians did come over land and burn the Athenian farmland and the city of Athens proper, but in another invasion, the Persians would have more luck coming in by sea. And if the Persians show up in massive numbers, the wall isn't going to be that useful. What the wall is useful for, though, is keeping Sparta out of Athens, because Sparta doesn't have a huge navy, even with Corinth. It's not a great navy. what Sparta can do is march their army into the countryside and burn all of these crops in through here, which, it's not a coincidence, is what Sparta actually does when the Peloponnesian Wars begin, the wars between Athens and Sparta in 431. Now, as I mentioned, 431 is the first year of the war, and Athens executes its grand plan. Everybody who lives in the countryside is told to pick up stakes, move all of their stuff and their people into the city of Athens. And the plan is that the people of Athens will order in all of their food from the ancient internet through the harbor. So all their food's coming in through the harbor. They don't need the farmland. It wasn't even supporting enough food to feed the city anyway. And they'll be able to indefinitely hold out against a Spartan siege because the Spartans can't break through the walls. It is not a coincidence that this war, the Peloponnesian War, marks the beginning of siege-breaking technology. In our next unit, we're going to talk about some of these inventions made specifically to break through walls, and also what sieges looked like before wall-breaking technology was a thing. Basically, before this point and during the Peloponnesian War, you just had to sit outside the city and wait for people to starve, but they're not going to starve if they can get food. Athens has neglected one key thing, though. There is no sewer drainage. There's not a lot of systematic plumbing here. There aren't aqueducts bringing in fresh water. This rainwater cisterns can't support this massive population, all of whom are living in this tiny area, all smushed together without germ theory, no masks, no social distance, and they're also connected to a port that serves the greater Mediterranean area. If this sounds like a recipe for a pandemic to you, you're right, there's a pandemic. We're still not sure what the actual disease was, but the plague of Athens breaks out in the year 430, the second year of the war. So 431, the year begins. 430, Athens is under a plague. People are dying left and right. They're having trouble burning all of the bodies, and some of them they're just tossing over the walls. Weirdly, the Spartans don't seem to get sick. I guess Spartans are better at social distancing. But in the city of Athens and in all of the islands attached to the Delian League and the Athenian Empire, the plague just rips through people of all ages, but especially military-aged people. So Athens faces a manpower shortage and is struggling through most of this war. It doesn't immediately take them out of the fighting. That this war goes on for almost 30 years. It goes from 431 to 404 BCE. This is a ludicrously long war. But it does cause Athens some real problems. So let this be a lesson to you. If your plan is to quarantine your city behind a wall while somebody else attacks you, make sure that you have a plague plan in place, and also wear masks. I promised that you could still see some of the long walls, and you can. Not a ton, though, because in 404, when the Spartans finally take over Athens, the first thing they do is dismantle the walls. They're like, Athens, we knew you were trouble when you built the wall. We're taking this thing down. You're not doing any of your shenanigans anymore. Dang it. A little bit of the wall was left, though. The foundations were kind of hard to remove, so we still have areas like this one here where you can still see the foundational blocks of the wall, and you can also see areas, or you can see the footprints of the walls in the streets of modern Athens. So the Piraeus, the harbor, is out here. We're looking down from one of the hills. This is the Leucavatos near the Acropolis. These lines that form the modern streets are built on top of the foundations of the long walls because it's a really stable, useful foundation. See the island of Salamis out there to our right. So we're looking down the valley of the Athenian heartland. Not a horrible plan, just, one little teeny flaw. Now, as I said, the Piraeus harbor contains both a commercial port and not just one military port actually, there's a subsidiary one over here. This one, though, the port of Zea, is the major military port, and it's currently under, as I said, underwater excavation from, I think, a Norwegian team. I have to check and make sure if I got that right. This is the military harbor because it does have such controllable inlet. And you can see the walls of the harbor come in on either side to make sure that there's a choke point and a seawall. And then this lovely, almost circular structure allows for the building of multiple ship sheds. Remember, your triremes aren't always being kept in the water because of shipworm. So when they're not in immediate use or underway, you shove them up on the shore a little bit to dry out some and stay away from the sea worms. And in this port, the sheds were structured in such a way that they were multi-story sheds, so you can shove them in here like Pez in a Pez dispenser. It's really quite brilliant, and the animation shows you what that looks like and how it works. If you were to sail your fleet for Athens, the Zea harbor, this military harbor, is looking out towards the immediate angle of attack. So this little spit in front of it, so it can't have storm surges. It's really protected. The ships aren't going to knock into each other. But the way the ship sheds are structured, you can release many, many ships very quickly at once, and they can navigate out through this harbor to blockade you from getting at Athens port. Attacking Athens via the harbor is going to be a very difficult proposition indeed. And when Athens finally falls, it's not the harbor that gets her, really not even overland so much. Their allies crumble, they're out of resources, and they eventually just have to surrender. So here's a link to the Zea video, but just to give you a teaser, this is what ship sheds look like, reconstructed. And they're exactly what they look like. They're sheds with ships in them. And this is several ships deep. So you'd have, use blue for this. So you'd have one ship here, and then another ship here, and then another ship here. So you could just keep pushing them out. And once they're pulled up in the dry dock, you can also use this back end of the ship shed for servicing and repairs. We don't just find these in Athens military port. We find them all over the Athenian Empire, including here at Cape Sunion. So we've talked about Sunion before in the context of the Battle of Marathon, right? Marathon is on this side of the promontory. Athens is back up in here. Oh, that's just a horrible line, isn't it? Well, let's erase that. Cape Sunion is out in the sea at the lookout point where you see ships coming around through the Aegean and moving up into Athens harbor, or from the western Mediterranean coming up. You can see everyone coming from Cape Sunion. And these ship sheds still preserve the foundations. Most of the paving stones are gone. You can see a few of them here and here. I have a colleague standing in the hollow where the keel beam is fitted. On either side here, you'd have structures made to keep the ship upright. And then as you saw people coming in, the sea line's right here, these rocks would have been pavers back in the day. All you have to do to launch the ship is just push it downhill out into the water. So this is a little bit like police cars waiting in underpasses on the highway for you to speed by, and then they can quickly like slip out and go get you. That's what this is, only with triremes. So this is a trireme attack trap.